Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out today to Long Pond Ironworks Visitor Center. I'm Kerry O'Brien. I'm currently the president of the Friends of Long Pond. We have some members of Long Pond here, some visitors. So for the historians here, I am just an amateur historian. I know a little bit about to be dangerous. I've done research on this using the local resources and talking to people. If you can improve on what I found, that's fine. This is just going to be an overview of the Highlands Ironworks and their involvement in the Revolutionary War. A lot of people who live up here just think we're a bedroom community from World War II and beyond, but we've been around before the Revolutionary War. So this is the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Opportunity to reflect on the nation's history and our local history as well. Acknowledges the diverse workforce and the innovation and enterprise. In short, it's a year to celebrate the cultural richness and industrial achievements that have made the United States today. So in the early 1600s, America was being discovered. In 1607, settlers in Jamestown found iron ore and its potential. A year later, they were shipping barrels of iron ore back to England, where it yielded high-quality iron. And by the 1700s, iron ore was being mined. But the colonies were still new, and the iron furnaces were creating cast or pig iron, which then could be converted to wrought iron products. But full-scale furnaces and production was beyond the colonials at that time. Hence, England. In the 1700s, England imported 80% of the iron needed to build the Royal Navy and its munitions. Simply feeding the armed troops was an extensive iron infrastructure. Massive demands made iron supply chains one of the most critical and expensive logistical challenges of 18th century warfare. But England in the 1700s, because war had destroyed their access to this iron, and they had also incurred an enormous debt with their wars. So England began looking toward the colonies to replace the lost iron, and so English companies started investing in American ironworks and building them up. At the time, iron ore from America gave England the means to increase her power over much of the globe. England also saw us as a revenue source to rebuild their banks. Before there was the Tea Act in 1773 and the Stamp Act in 1775, there was the Iron Act of 1750, meant to stimulate British industry by allowing raw iron production in the American companies, but not allowing the colonies to manufacture the finished goods. Under the Act, existing mills were allowed to continue, but new mills were not allowed. The iron was to be smelted in America, shipped to England, there to be made into the products, to be brought back to the colonies, to be sold to us. The Iron Act limited the colonists' economic independence and forced them to buy finished goods at a higher cost. This spurred protest. The Iron Act was largely ignored and difficult to enforce in the colonies. Colonists secretly built as many as 60 new illegal iron mills. The act ultimately contributed to rising tension between the colonies and England, feeding the causes of the American Revolution. As the colonies moved towards a rebellion, iron forges expanded their capabilities and started making ammunitions and weapons here. By the start of the American Revolution, the colonies had a highly developed iron industry. At this time, if the colonies were grouped together, they would have been one of the top iron producers in the world and third in terms of exports. Getting to the history of ironworks in the Highlands. Around 1737 or so, almost 300 years ago, Cornelius Board, a Welsh miner, erected a small iron furnace at the head of the Ringwood River. He later fought in the Revolutionary War. In 1742, he sold his holdings to the Ringwood Company, which built the first blast iron furnace. A new furnace was built in 1762. but by 63, that ironworks had closed. In 1764, Peter Hasenclever and his English partners purchased the Ringwood Company, consisting of the original furnace, the new furnace, 2 forges, and several dwellings. Hasenclever referred to his newly acquired work as being decayed, yet 4 months later, he had repaired the round-done works and was making iron almost immediately. Soon after, he acquired over 50,000 acres of land on which he built the Charlottesburg and Long Pond. So when we talk about the Ringwood Company, we're talking about the Ringwood furnace, Long Pond furnace, and Charlottesburg furnace. By the autumn of 64, more than 500 workers and their families that Hasenclever had hired began to arrive. Hasenclever at the same time was buying, quote, 122 horses, 214 draft oxen, 51 cows, vast number of implements for the works. More funds were laid out for building the roads, dams, reservoirs, and other structures. At Long Pond, Ringwood, and Charlottesburg, Hasenclever introduced such iron-making innovations: furnace walls of slate, overshot water wheels, and hammer wheels shaft equipped with strong cast iron rings. The furnace at Long Pond was not completed until 1768, after Hasenclever had left. But by that July, it was in blast with the capacity of up to 25 tons of pig iron a week. Although other mines were closer to Long Pond, the ore used in the furnace was carted from the Good Hope mine at Ringwood because of its quality. The Long Pond Ironworks was considered superior to those at Ringwood and Charlottesburg. And you can't see it too well. That's a picture of a pig iron ingot that's in our museum next door here from that time. Ringwood Company became the actually, that ingot was from the West Milford Museum. This ingot is in the back room there. Ringwood Company becomes the American Iron Company in 1766. Hasenclever was surprised to learn that he had acquired a new partner called the American Iron Company. A year later, the American Iron Company replaced Hasenclever. Although credited for his capabilities, there were charges of poor judgment and overspending, with Jason Humphrey, whom Hasenclever had complained was utterly unqualified. 2 years after that, Humphrey was replaced by John Jacob Faish, a highly skilled ironmaster who Hasenclever had brought in 1764 as a supervisor. Under Faish direction, production continued, but never at a scale that approached the expected potential. In 1771, Faish remained in sole charge of the ironworks until the arrival of Robert Erskine, who had been hired by the American Company. They ran the ironworks jointly until a year later, where Faish left, but more about him later. In 1772, Robert Erskine became ironmaster. Robert Erskine was born in Scotland and attended the university. He became known as an inventor and engineer. In 1770, the American Iron Company offered him a position as director. Erskine accepted and spent the next 2 months traveling to the different mining regions of Britain, learning the techniques. A year later, in April 1771, he arrived in America and immediately visited each of the American Iron Companies. He then sent a report pointing out the strengths and weaknesses of each site and describing the improvements he planned to make. So this is a painting done in 1857, portraying what they believe the original house that Erskine lived in over in Ringwood Manor. This was the predecessor of the current Ringwood Manor. Erskine, the ironworks struggle. From the start in 1764, the ironworks had yet to show a profit. Hasenclever spent freely to develop and grow the ironworks, but few consignments of iron did not produce enough revenue to cover costs. Succeeding managers were focused on keeping their jobs and just making enough iron to make them look good. Erskine had been sent to turn around the operation, but after 2 years, even though the ironworks had increased efficiency in production, they still weren't profitable. In late 1772, the investor put the ironworks up for sale, but didn't get any buyers. In 1773, Erskine contracted with a local merchant firm to continue operations. The firm would provide needed funding, and Erskine would provide them with iron. However, within a year, that relationship fell apart. Erskine then wrote to the American Iron Company for advice and eventually offered to take on responsibility for the ironworks himself. So the top picture there is the hammer and anvil that's in front of Ringwood Manor. That was here at one of the ironworks. And the picture at the bottom shows you how it was used. It was actually picked up by a water wheel and slammed down and hammering out the iron, the ingots. All right, we're getting there. Erskine warns of colonial unrest. Although he had only been here a few years, Erskine seemed to have caught the discontent of the colonists. In 1774, he began to file reports about the political settlements. In June 74, he wrote, "Have no doubts that a total suspension of commerce from Great Britain will certainly take place. Such are the local sentiments." That same month, he wrote, "The Virginians are the soul of America. But from what has appeared hitherto, the whole colony seemed to be that of New England as a common cause. And by October, the Oliverian spirit of New England is effectually aroused and diffused over the whole continent. The rule at home has gone too far." Later, in 1775, he continues, "Communications with my native country will soon may be cut off. This prospect is gloomy." In May, he writes, "The people are earnest everywhere. The situation in this country is beyond dispute against the British ministry and their acts, which the Americans will never subscribe." And in June, he wrote, "The people of this continent have their eyes about them and are determined to be free or die." Erskine's militia. Around this time, in June of 1775, soon after his warnings, Erskine organized one of the first companies of militia in New Jersey for the men who worked for him. Known as the Erskine's Independence Company afoot, its purpose was mainly to protect the valuable ironworks from the British and therefore ensure the continuation of iron production. He wrote that it was composed of forgemen, carpenters, blacksmiths, and other hands. The company varied in size from 45 to 75 men. Drills were conducted at Ringwood and Long Pond. Erskine outfitted and armed the men of his own expense. Based on survival records, he purchased green wool for uniforms, as well as shoes, muskets, and bayonets. Additionally, he stockpiled large stores of materials and food. In August 1775, the New Jersey legislature officially commissioned him as captain of the company. At that time, Erskine asked that his militia be exempt from the war draft. However, he was refused. The demands of war pitted draft quotas against his need for skilled workers. Interestingly, he was refused because they were militia. Had they been regular workers, they might have been exempt. So now we're moving on, what was going on with the British. Both the British and American forces recognized the strategic importance of the Hudson River. If the British were able to control navigation, they would be able to split the rebellion, dividing New England from the middle and southern colonies. In June of 1776, the British fleet arrived and discharged thousands of troops on Staten Island, threatening New York and New Jersey. And in July, 5 British ships passed the Patriot batteries at New York City and anchored in Tappan Bay. The Continental Congress authorized chevaux de frise and a chain to block the river and obstruct British navigation. What is that, you might ask? Well, the concept of a defensive obstacle made of wood or metal stakes is attributed to in China. Their use was spread in Europe during the Middle Ages and gained the name chevaux de frise during the European wars. The anti-ship version was apparently an American invention in the Revolutionary War. During the war, these devices were deployed to protect American forts. In 1776, Erskine designed a marine cheval de frise. A tetrahedron, which is a three-dimensional triangular pyramid, made of several 32-foot-long beams of iron-tipped points. Set afloat, the submerged device was intended to pierce the wooden hulls of ships. Strung together with chain, they would be a formidable contrivance. So if you've seen the one on the lawn of the Ringwood Police Department, that's actually a half-size model. The original design, that's the picture of it, would have been twice that size. However, there was no evidence the design was ever adopted. Erskine also proposed it be used in the Delaware River, but was rejected by Benjamin Franklin because of a different design was already being installed. That design was a caisson box cheval de frise, in which case they would build a box on the bottom of the bed of the river, fill it with stone, and then stick in the long pikes with metal tips. Caissons were large boxes. More than 100 of these chevaux de frise were in location between Plum Point near New Windsor and Popple Island, a rocky obstruction close to the eastern banks. By the end of 1776, work was being started on the spear, crates, and accumulation of stone. The Ringwood Ironworks made the iron tips at the end of the long posts for the Poplar Island cheval de frise. The Ringwood Forge was making approximately 40 iron tips per day. My brother and I were up at the Washington's headquarters in Newburgh, New Jersey, where they actually have a point of the cheval de frise and some of the booms that we're about to talk about. In the summer of 77, the Ringwood Ironworks manufactured iron for a boom, which was a large arrangement of logs and small chains often placed alongside or upstream of the main chain to absorb the impact of ships attempting to breach it. The boom was intended to be installed in front of Fort Montgomery. Over 30 tons of chain and components were carried by ox all the way from Ringwood up the Navajo Mountains to the Hudson River. Unfortunately, the English captured it and carried it away. After the capture of Fort Montgomery, the Ringwood iron was taken to West Point and used to make a boom placed in front of the West Point chain, which was forged at the Sterling Ironworks and placed alongside the river in 1778. The picture at the bottom is from West Point, where they actually have a piece of the chain with cannon. And again, at the Washington headquarters, there's a Newburgh, they had a piece of the chain, if you're interested. Ovens for the troops. American Company iron was used to make portable ovens for the colonial troops based on correspondence between General Washington and Robert Erskine. Most ovens at that time were made of brick and stonework, and when General Washington mentioned in a report the sodden cakes too commonly used by soldiers, he recommended temporary ovens in each brigade, which, by men who understood it, can be easily erected. That summer, a number of portable steel irons made at Ringwood furnace were made, but seemed not to have reached the Army in time that year. In a letter from Washington to Erskine, headquarters, November 1777, "Sir, I shall be glad to know whether the portable ovens bespoke last summer are finished. If they are, you may send them down to the Army." Erskine responded 10 days later, "May it please your Excellency, the 20 ovens from last summer were delivered as follows." And then he goes on to talk about ovens as well. Of the 20 ovens, we believe this is the only one left, and that's in the museum next door here. All right, Erskine, map maker to General Washington. In late 1776, Major General Charles Lee asked Erskine to make sketches of the area west of New York City. Although Lee was captured before the sketches were completed, Erskine apparently met with General Washington and showed him his work. Washington then asked Erskine to expand the work to include the area south towards Philadelphia. Gathering some materials, Erskine began developing a map of the area. By mid-July, he had completed the map and presented it to General Washington. This map so impressed the commanding general that he carried on his person for much of the war, even annotating it in 16 places. Erskine met with Washington at various arms camps throughout the war, including Morrison, Valley Forge, and White Plains. Washington visited Ringwood several times to discuss maps were being drawn. You can't really see it here. There's a blow up here. This is Long Pond, Ringwood, and Charlottesburg furnaces. This is the Sterling Ironworks from the chain iron came from. And this is Mount Hope down here that you'll hear about shortly. On July 1777, Washington asked Congress for permission to appoint a good geographer to survey the roads, take sketches. He went on to recommend Erskine as thoroughly skilled in this business. and uniformly supported the character of a fast friend of America. In July of 1777, Congress granted Washington permission, and 3 days later, Washington conveyed the confirmation to Erskine, then 5 days later he accepted. For the next 3 years, the Surveyor General of the Continental Army, Erskine and his surveyors developed more than 275 maps of the area that covered the northern section of the war. These produced accurately shown roads, rivers, mountain forges, and marshes, providing important terrain and planning information for Washington and his Continental Army. These detailed drawings were credited with giving Washington superior knowledge of the terrain, enabling him to outmaneuver the British. By 1780, however, Erskine's surveying department had dwindled. With fewer surveyors, Washington was in the field more frequently. Unfortunately, this led to his demise and sickness. In September of 1780, Erskine died in his home at Ringwood, likely due to pneumonia. Erskine is buried in the historical cemetery at Ringwood Manor, one of the oldest in northern New Jersey. It's not known precisely how many individuals are buried at the cemetery. Estimates range from 75 to over 300. Among the cemetery are rows of plain stone markers. Oral tradition states that some unmarked graves are those of unknown Revolutionary War soldiers who died along the long old road here, not from battle, but from disease and the rigors of the time. John Jacob Fish, which we heard from before. Fish was a skilled ironmaker in Switzerland in 1764. He was engaged by Peter Hasencleffer as an ironmaster at the Ringwood. His initial responsibilities involved overseeing daily production, managing labor, and ensuring technical efficiency. In 1768, he played a key role in initiating the nearby Charlottesburg Ironworks, which expanded the company's regional capability to over 1,000 tons of iron annually. In 1769, following Hasencleffer's departure, Fish assumed oversight of the American Iron Company's New Jersey's property. In 1771, he was in sole charge until the arrival of Robert Erskine, and in 1772, he decides to leave, and he bought his own mine, and its produce opened the modern-day equivalent of a hardware store. John Jacob Fish, forging supplies for the Continental Army. As an iron master at Mount Hope Furnace in Rockaway Township, he directed the production of essential ammunitions and materials for the Continental Army. He oversaw operations that included forging cannons, shot and shells critical for artillery needs. The furnace also manufactured refined bar iron, shovels, axes, and other implements. In recognition, in 1777, the New Jersey legislature exempted Mount Hope's ironworkers from military duty to prioritize uninterrupted output. Fish entered into contracts with Congress, including one in 1780 for supplying materials. These efforts positioned Mount Hope as a key industrial contributor to the Patriot cause, with its output supporting artillery and field operation that amid Britain's naval blockades limited importing arms. Employing Hessian soldiers, Fish addressed labor shortages at the Mount Hope furnace by employing captured Hessian soldiers. In 1777, with personal approval from General Washington, Fish secured the release of 30 Hessians. Some reports vary on that number. Many of these men had been taken prisoner at the Battle of Trenton in December 1776. Which was the Delaware crossing. Washington himself visited Fish, granting permission to use these prisoners and even allowing 50 additional men that work at Mount Hope instead of serving in the army. The Hessian workers filled essential roles, including wood chopping for charcoal production, furnace operation, and specialized trades such as carpentering and blacksmithing. They even brewed beer for the workers. Fish's fluency in German enabled efficient communication and management, integrating these prisoners into a crew already composed largely of foreign-born workers. There were other local heroes as well. One of them was Joseph Board, who was the son of Cornelius Board, the pioneer ironmaker we mentioned at the beginning. He was a prosperous farmer at the outbreak of the war, having augmented his family by hauling Ringwood iron for transport. His house is clearly lettered on some of Erskine's maps. He organized a company of militia and served as the captain of Colonel Thusis Day's regiment of the Bergen County, New Jersey militia from 1776 to 1783. Colonel Day's militia was one of New Jersey's most active state forces during the war. Captains like Board were responsible for leading companies in skirmishes, guarding supply routes, and supporting large campaigns. Their service was vital to maintaining Patriot control of New Jersey's interior. Board's regiment was active in several key engagements in 1778, the Battle of Newbridge, the Battle of Hackensack, the Battle of Aquanock Bridge, and the Battle of English Highlands. These battles were part of the British and Hessian efforts to push into New Jersey and disrupt Patriot supplies, and the militia's participation was crucial in defending the state's interior. And that's about it. I hope this demonstrates how the local people and iron industries of the Highlands were an active part of the Revolutionary War. Thank you.